So here we are again. My name is David Lindo, also known as the Urban Birder. And tonight, this afternoon, this morning, we have Johannes Jansen, who's here to chat with us regarding Batumi, which is a place which she'll tell us all about in Georgia. And I had the privilege of visiting very recently. I want to say also that tonight, this afternoon, this morning is sponsored by Leica Sport Optics. So thanks very much for that. So with no further ado, Johannes, how are you and where are you?
Good, I'm good, thank you. I'm in Ghent, Belgium at the moment. Well, I'm not in this nice forest, but just in my living room.
And you, we were talking earlier, and you said that the honey buzzard in your living room was your second one in Belgium this year.
Yes, yeah. It's a picture from a few days ago. And it was actually the second honey buzzard I was lucky to see during fieldwork in Belgium. And usually, it's beginning of May that we might see the first ones. And if I'm in Batumi, if I would have been in Batumi, I probably would have seen thousands by now. But I was very happy with this one, as it was not very often that you can see them perched like this. It just jumped off, flushed out of a bramble bush just in front of me and then landed in the tree quite close. So that was quite a special moment.
Yeah, it's interesting with honey buzzards. I think for me, they are my favorite raptor without a doubt because for years and years I was dreaming about seeing a honey buzzard. Oh, honey buzzard, where is one? Where is it? And I was getting all confused looking at the book and trying to sort of look at the differences between a honey buzzard and a buzzard. And then sort of fretting every time I saw a buzzard, thinking, is that honey buzzard? Is that honey buzzard? But as we were discussing earlier, it's all about really watching as many buzzards as possible because every time you look at a buzzard makes you understand how a honey buzzard looks like and how it works because they are effectively a bit more like kites, aren't they, the way they fly? They twist their tails and they've got a different sort of body shape, haven't they?
Yes, and also the wing shape when they soar, it's quite different as well. Like these buzzards go very V-shaped when they soar, when they thermal, but honey buzzards are almost flat when the drooping hand. So it's quite typical. But once you've seen one or more, it's way easier to pick them out and to identify them. But I understand it's quite difficult, and there's a lot of confusion with common buzzards, of course.
Yeah, because it's so variable in plumage as well. I remember, what do I remember? I remember seeing, I mean, one thing you talked about in the woods, I've seen them close up. I remember being in Prague, walking through some park in the middle of the city and flashing this buzzard, and it landed in a tree very close to me. And I remember looking at it, thinking, "Hang on, it's got really yellow eyes. That's a honey buzzard," because you don't often sort of see buzzards in that kind of way in terms of being on the floor and then suddenly flying up onto a branch, do you?
Yeah. No, it's probably disturbed his meal.
Yeah.
Then it's just stays around and just watches you to see what you're doing. You're heading off or not.
Absolutely. Well, Johannes and I, Zoomers, have known each other for a few years. I can't even, it's one of those classic scenarios where I can't actually remember the very first time I met you. And I embarrass myself so much on this because I say to people, "Oh, we haven't met," and they say, "Well, actually, we met and we had dinner." Oh, really? So before I embarrass myself any further, did we meet? We must have met at bird fair, no?
Yes, yeah. I remember being at bird fair as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we met at
Yep.
bird fair, but you very kindly invited me to Batumi a couple of years ago, which was an incredible experience. So thank you for that. But when I see you, I kind of
Well,
think of you.
it was quite difficult to get you there. I remember it took 3 or 4 bird fairs, and then the fourth one we were actually making this specific plans and having the invitation to Batumi.
Oh, that's true, but I must say I wasn't dragging my heels. I'd love to have come, So I think there's natural scenarios getting in the way. But whenever I look at you, I think, like for example, when we were in Batumi, I just think you are Georgian because you just hang out there. You seem to sort of fit in like you know the place inside out. But we'll talk about that shortly because obviously you'll be giving us a quick presentation on Batumi. But let me tell us, how did you get to be so interested in raptors?
Well, from child on, I was interested in nature and in bugs in the garden, and gradually um, grew this interest. I joined a youth organization that was specifically for children with a big interest in nature. And from that moment, I started birding around the age of 8. And yeah, obviously birds of prey, raptors, that's the prize bird on any outing. So I was really into birds of prey from quite young. And I remember just a camp we did in the north of Belgium in July, and we had a harrier flying over, and this really good views of a Montagu's harrier just out of nowhere popped up, flew over our campsite, and then disappeared. It was such a memorable experience that I just wanted to know more about these birds of prey and harriers in specific. So that kind of defined the travels that I did with my friends in later years. So when I was a student, we just wandered off further and further from our homes on journeys, first neighboring countries and more to the east. And it was actually, first in Romania and then the year after in Turkey that I really got into this raptor migration watching, which was really spectacular in both places. And then kind of the plans were shaped to carry on even further to the east, which is the other side of the Black Sea, and that's then Georgia, Batumi.
But going back to the young 8-year-old Johannes who was curious about nature and birds, was there, to quote my good American friends, a spark moment? Was there something that triggered you, or was it always in you, or did you have someone that kind of was a mentor to you, like a family member or a friend or someone else?
I think the people surrounding me in this youth organization were really instrumental to developing this further interest. And every week in the weekend, we would go out with our bike to a specific spot on an excursion. So that was kind of the thing that carried on and that grew the interest. And a really spark moment where I really got to feel this intensity of bird migration, which is really what drives me to go and search for this unique concentrations of migrating birds, was on a June top at the Belgian coast in a good spring morning, where we did some migration watches. And that was a specific, very good day with eastern winds for swift migration. And I still get goosebumps from this moment, this morning, with these swifts coming from everywhere and literally just flying just below your feet or right next to you in all possible heights and ways and in loose groups, but continuously passing. And there must have been hundreds of thousands. I don't remember the actual figure, but it was very impressive. And that was kind of the moment that I decided, okay, I want to witness more of this and to specifically look for these places where this concentration of migrating birds are so spectacular.
Well, I'll tell you what, migration spectacles are something to behold. And I think someone's asked a question actually about other areas, but let's talk about Batumi. And why don't you show us, let's familiarize ourselves with this amazing place that you are drawn to every year, it seems, apart from last year, of course, and this year.
Yep.
And Zoomers, to watch this, I know you probably know this already because you're probably seasoned Zoomers, but you just go to speaker view and you can see the whole of the screen of this lovely idea, this Raptor count and this actual location.
Good. Are you seeing this? Is the
Yes,
presentation visible?
yeah.
So, given we have, well, we don't want to be on Zoom for the entire night, I've limited my presentation here with a brief introduction to the Batumi Raptor count. And it's mainly an introduction to where we're at, what we're doing out there. Some of the results I will try to show on the migration monitoring end, but also the results of our conservation work that we do in this in the area of Batumi in Georgia. So to start with, I'll just show you a little bit of the history and talk about it. So as I explained just earlier, we kind of started with these plans to go to Georgia in 2007. We were looking for another place to visit after we visited the eastern coast of Romania, and then the year after we were in Turkey and the Bosporus for this raptor watching. And then we decided to try the other end of the Black Sea, which is in Georgia. And there, one of my friends visited the country a few years earlier, where he did meet a lot of Georgian ornithologists. And they advised to check out Batumi, especially in autumn, as there are many raptors flying by. But very little was known by then what the exact numbers were. So how many of these birds of prey would pass. So we went on the adventure. We traveled to Ankara, Turkey. From there, we took a bus. Then we crossed the border with Georgia. And then we spent 5 days in Batumi. And then we traveled a bit around in Georgia and Azerbaijan. And then we returned for 5 days to Batumi again to raptor watch. And what we saw there was so tremendously spectacular, and these numbers were just unheard, that we decided to start a project the year after. So that was 2008, and that's when we started an organized international citizen science raptor count. So we've been able to organize this count every year, annually, every autumn, until 2019. Due to obvious reasons, last year had to be cancelled, of course, due to the pandemic. And we also conducted 2 spring counts. So also in spring, starting from March until May, we've done 2 counts in 2019 and 2020. By now, more than 1,000 volunteers and more than 150 students have attended this project and spent many hours counting and studying and working on the project. And I think we tally 35 raptor species in total, which is really impressive, and it covers almost the entire raptor section of your Collins guide, except for a few Arctic species, of course. And also noteworthy is that more than 1 million raptors are recorded in the recent years. So that's quite a big tally. But just to orientate a little bit and to see why Batumi is so important for raptor conservation and for raptor migration. As you can see, and as you probably know, many bird species are migratory. So from spring on, they migrate to their breeding grounds in the northern hemisphere. In most parts of Europe, birds start to arrive in April. Until May, there's a lot of migrating birds that arrive in their breeding grounds. And then after the breeding season is done, they return to their wintering grounds, usually in the Mediterranean area or even further south. Sub-Sahara Africa, and even up until South Africa, they migrate. So these birds, and specifically these birds of prey, they have kind of traditional migration routes. They travel in the most efficient way. And on certain specific and strategic locations, you can see them in quite big numbers. And a few of them are quite well known and have been known for decades, as they're being Falsterbo in Sweden, the Pyrenees on the border between France and Spain, the southern tip of Spain, of course, which is called Gibraltar or Tarifa, is a very important bottleneck as well, especially for both spring and autumn migration, actually. The, the southern tip of Italy and Cape Bon in Tunis. And then if you go further east, at the eastern side of the Mediterranean Sea, we're having the eastern coast of, the coast of Romania and Bulgaria, actually. And then two places in Turkey, which is the Bosporus, and another place on the Mediterranean coast. And then even further south, the same flyway, the same birds, they follow the shores of Turkey, south over Lebanon, and then over Israel. And many of them pass into Egypt and then across the Suez Canal, which is also a quite well-known and important raptor migration hotspot. But from further east and from the eastern side of the Black Sea, where you see this very big yellow dot, that's actually Batumi. And it's quite special in a way because on the first, in the first place, there's a lot of land and a lot of territory, a lot of breeding grounds to the north, but also the specific geography of the site is detrimental for the high concentration of birds of prey in this spot. And how this works is because these birds of prey, they try to travel as efficient as possible. As you may know, the sun creates thermals, which is rising hot air, which creates an updrift. And these birds of prey, they soar and they use this energy from the sun to continue to gain height and then to drift and to fly further south. So they do this in quite an organized way, and specifically in the places where these thermals are abundant. And one aspect is that the thermals are easily created over land, but not over sea, because over the sea, this energy from the sun is mainly absorbed, especially in autumn, whilst this bare ground and rocky areas and even urban areas, they create a lot of uplift of hot air that is created by the sun. And this is why these birds of prey turn into more or less traditional routes. And in fact, they're just trying to travel as efficient as possible, navigating around these big masses of seawater, the sea, and in Georgia in specific, that's the Black Sea, of course. But then, and more special in this Georgian setting, is that on the other hand, on the other side of this Black Sea, there's a very big mountain chain, which is the Caucasus. We have the higher Caucasus to the north, which is the border with Russia. From this side, many of these migrating birds migrate down, migrate south, and then they end up in some sort of bottleneck, quite literally. There's a very flat lowland, which is the Kolkheti lowland. And there, many of these birds get together, and then they are forced on both sides, actually, one side by the sea and on the other side, this big mountain range, into this bottleneck. And this mountain range actually is quite humid, and there's a lot of forest and a lot of clouds. And these clouds, they just prevent a lot of thermal activity, and they even force these birds even closer to the sea. So what we see in Batumi is that there is a stretch of land of about 10 kilometers wide, where almost all of these birds have to pass through. Now, how does Batumi compare to other watch sites in the world? it turned out to be quite impressive. And of course, there are a few spots in Central America that are really, really huge. And if you look at just the geography of Northern America and Southern America, there's a very clear bottleneck in Mexico and further south in Panama and Costa Rica. This is mainly the same flyway. But there in an autumn, in 1 year, one autumn, they tally over 5 million birds of prey. But then on the old country, or how do you call it, the continent, so Europe and Central Asia, there wasn't really a bottleneck that was of this proportion. Up until the time that we discovered Batumi as being so important and so huge, where almost 1,200,000 raptors are recorded migrating in one autumn. So this is in one half a year, actually. And also Israel was already known a very long time from the, even biblical, from the Bible, there are stories about this bird migration. But in Eilat, Israel, in spring then, they tally sometimes up to 1 million birds. Usually it's about around 800,000 birds of prey that soar by in spring. So this really put Batumi on the map, on the world map of this migration hotspots in the world. And even more, sometimes these conditions and this migration timing is so exceptional that you witness a truly spectacular day. Usually we get peak days or big days, as we call them, in Batumi, of about 100,000 birds of prey on the same day, which is pretty much seen from one place only. But then in 2014, we witnessed such a coincidence of weather conditions that more than a quarter of a million birds were funneled down into Batumi on the same day, and that was well, quite a sight. It's hard to imagine these numbers, of course, in this setting, but I can assure you there was a lot of birds everywhere. Everywhere where you look, the sky darkened, and you could see steppe buzzards on every height, and every corner of your eye was filled with birds of prey. So more or less 30 species of birds of prey are recorded every year. So this 35 species is, of course, the total of all the different years in a row. And we've done some analysis on this data of these 10 years of monitoring have been ended by 2018. And that's where we did our analysis on. So I will present some of these that are important for the count or for the place in detail. Important to know is that we try to monitor or try to count the most important ones and then the most significant ones. And apparently the amount of honey buzzards, for example, that we've counted, we've compared them to the estimated world population. That was quite astonishing, as we had recorded over an estimate of over 130% of the estimate world population, which is quite well, surprising, of course, which means that this world population estimate is underestimated, of course. But on the other hand, it indicates how important and how significant this place is to monitor these birds of prey and use these counts as an early warning system to detect trends in their populations. And there's about 10 species of birds of prey that have a proportion of more than 1% of their world population that pass by Batumi. And those I will discuss now, and just to give you an idea about the numbers. You should first have an idea on how we count them, of course. So this annual autumn count is mainly based on volunteers, and some of them stay for the entire season, which is about 2 months. Usually most of the volunteers stay for 2 weeks or 3 weeks to follow and to count this migration flow. And what we do is not only count them, but we also try to keep track of the age of these birds, as if it's possible to see this in the field, of course, and to give us an idea about the phenology, of course, and the timing of these birds and the species that pass. So we made quite a strict protocol, and everybody that is volunteering has to follow this. Of course, everybody's welcome to visit these count stations, but the volunteers, the counters, they really have to stick to this protocol and be disciplined to count in this way. We have fixed dates from where we start, which is now about the 12th of August until the 21st of October. And we start every morning on sunrise until 2 hours before sunset, which covers most of the the raptor migration that passes through Batumi usually. The standardized way also ensures that we get very comparable data over the years. And we've used 2 different stations. One is closer to the sea, the other one is 4 kilometers more inland, so towards these mountains. This is how it looks like on Google Earth. And this white line that runs from the sea up until the mountains is our transect line. And when these birds are migrating north to south, at one point they have to cross, they cross this virtual line, and that's when we record them. That's when we put them in an app. Today we have the recent years we've used an app to record this data, and then the exact time and the direction, of course, is usually south. So we know that there's a very little double counts in this, and it's quite it's quite good to have an idea about this this way of counting before you get there, and you will notice that it's very little birds that are actually double counted, because they just carry on south in autumn every time. And of course, these annual results, these millions that we count, we've reached in the recent years. So the first years we did some pilot counts. We counted everything that we could, and from 2012 we decided to monitor a certain set of species and also include this steppe buzzard migration. And that's when we actually reached this magical number of 1 million birds of prey on every autumn. And as you can see, from 2012 on, every year we reached this total, usually by the end of September or sometimes in the beginning of October. And that was the tally at the time. And what does this flight actually consist of? 90% of these birds of prey are from 3 different raptor species. The most abundant is this honey buzzard. And usually on average, there's about 500,000 of them that migrate through Batumi every autumn. It's a stunning number, and if you're there for about 3 or 4 weeks, you will probably see 50% of them, as they have a very, very distinct peak in their migration, usually early, so late August and early September. You can expect this peak of honey buzzard migration. Best year was in 2014, where 660,000 honey buzzards passed the count stations. Then the second most abundant is the steppe buzzard. Usually we get 220,000 steppe buzzards in autumn. But then, very surprisingly, there's quite a lot of variation in the steppe buzzard numbers over the years, so it goes a bit up and down. It's very weather dependent, actually. The best year was in 2014 with also 500,000 of the steppe buzzards. That was also this record day of 280,000 birds of prey on a day. Most of them were steppe buzzards. And they usually come by the end of the season, late September, early October. And then the third most is the black kite. And that is on average 100,000, which makes 11% of the total flight. And the best year was 2015, 175,000. And it usually peaks around mid-season. It's a bit more spread out. They start migrating in good numbers from the beginning of September, and it carries on until the end of September, usually. But a lot of black kites, they seem to increase as well. And that's a graph that I will show later on to show you. So this is an impression of how such a group looks like. This is a kettle, and it's mainly honey buzzards. And there's one other individual amongst them, one other species. And the sharp-eyed might be able to spot the black kite that is almost in the center of the image. But this looks very chaotic. And this kind of what we call a cattle is just a group of soaring birds together in one terminal. It's very disorganized and it's very difficult to count. So actually what we do is we wait until this cattle rises up and reaches the top of the kettle. And then they start to glide. They start to glide out of this kettle in one direction, usually south, of course, but somewhere in the sky. And then you have some kind of a river of raptors that pass by. And it's then that one or a few volunteers start to count and identify the species. Sometimes if it's really intense, one of them just counts the total number, just any raptor that passes, and a few other volunteers, they try to pick out the other species. So usually beginning of September is honey buzzard peak. So almost all of them are honey buzzards, and somebody just distracts or just counts the other species, the other individuals, for example, black kites or booted eagles amongst them, to get a really good count. And actually, all of those birds are individually clicked or counted. We have these kind of hand tallies to keep track of the numbers. Sometimes when it's really, really intense, they get clicked by the 3 or by the 5. But then again, it's the protocol to literally count the birds, and every bird gets tallied in this way. So to give you a better impression, because these pictures don't do justice to this phenomena, I've included a little movie which is made on one of the big days for this honey buzzard migration. It's filmed by John Wright, very passionate raptor enthusiast as well. He works on ospreys in the UK, used to work. And this kind of gives an impression how it looks like when these streams of honey buzzards, in this case, are coming in front of the count station. And there's a lot of black kites amongst them. And as you can see, they thermal up, and then they, in some sort of band or a river.
Yeah, you can palm top it, yeah.
They glide by, and they glide to another thermal. And in this way, the volunteers, they divide the sky, actually, and they have one coordinator, which is also called traffic control. And he just guarantees that every stream of birds is covered and make sure that everybody is onto it. And he checks if there are no other streams just disappearing or going to another side, or left uncounted when they pass the transect line.
BK 3 West 2. BK 3 West 2.
You can also hear the clicking sound, which is these hand tallies that are a typical sound when it's a good day.
Are you checking the back?
This is actually what it looks like when they stream from one kettle to another. Sometimes there's one that takes a little bit a different route, and it gets really chaotic, especially with the
Awesome perspective.
when they start to mingle, or when streams get together at a certain point, or when cattle just shift, sometimes there's a wind that just drifts them from one side to another. That gets really complicated for the counters, for the volunteers to get a good count. So apart from these three most abundant species, Batumi is really unique for harrier migration. It's one of the best places. Actually, it's the best location that we know right now for harrier migration. And every autumn, there's about 20,000 individuals that are seen or counted. Most of them are marsh harriers, and then about 5,000 of them are Montagues. And we get a few hen harriers, but then also late September, there's a nice migration of pallet harriers as well. So you get them in every plumage, from nice males, adult males, Montagues, but also the female types. And it's a really good place to study them and to learn how to identify these harriers. And for eagles, it's not the best place in the world for different eagle species, but for booted eagle, it's quite an important bottleneck with on average 7,500 individuals seen every autumn. For short-toed eagles, if you're really interested in big numbers of short-toed, you should go to Tarifa in Spain. There's many more that are seen over there, but in Batumi, we're very happy when we get a good day of short-toed eagles, a dozen or sometimes 100 a day, and the season total of about 1,500 is on average what we see. Ospreys is a good indicator of how good the volunteer is scanning the sky, because they don't follow these streams usually. They just migrate. They don't often use cattle on their migration, and they can pass by at any moment during the day. Even if it's slow migration for other species, you could just have an osprey coming out of nowhere. So about 130 on average is an indication on how good the volunteers are scanning the sky. As for spotted eagles, what we call or refer to as large eagles, there's about 10,000 of them every autumn. The majority is lesser spotted, with about 5,000 on average. And it's quite good to see this greater spotted amongst them. It's later in the season, usually in October, you start to mingle in or mix in. Also, steppe eagle is usually it's the star of the day, especially the first ones that fly by in the autumn, and we get about 250 up until 500 individuals every autumn. Imperial eagles, of course, that's definitely the prize bird, and we usually get around the first days of October a big day for large eagle migration. Where you can have a day where you can see 5,000 eagles from a count station. And this is, of course, how you want to see them, especially these eastern imperial eagles. This is a juvenile bird, and if it passes that close, it's really the star bird of the day. Then, of course, it's not only about the numbers and the big bulk. There's also some really rare or special birds that we look forward to seeing on migration. Turned out that Batumi is quite a good place for this crested honey buzzard, which is the bigger relative of the European honey buzzard. It's distributed much more to the east, and it was not known for Georgia. Before we got there, we discovered the first crested honey buzzards for that country on migration. And we can identify about between 20 up until 50 on season. And it's highly dependent on how good the volunteers, or we scan these late honey buzzards, as they are usually amongst them in smaller numbers, of course. If you can imagine seeing 500,000 honey buzzards, try to pick out this crested one. Also Egyptian vulture, griffon vulture, and a few falcons. Of course, black storks in quite good numbers is very nice to get and to see. And surprisingly, we see very little pelicans, a handful usually, which is quite surprising as they do breed in eastern Georgia, but apparently they don't migrate through the Batumi bottleneck. And then apart from these soaring migrating birds, there's of course a lot of other migrant birds that pass by. You could see turtle doves in good numbers for swifts and swallows and martins. There's sometimes really good days, but we decided to focus on these species that we try to monitor, which are mainly raptors and a few other birds, as the roller is also quite vulnerable and threatened. We also count the rollers that migrate through. But that's one of the few not raptor species that we have included in our counts. The other ones are just for the enjoyment of the volunteers and the visitors to see, but they are not counted in a standardized way. Then to get to the final part of these numbers, we've also organized a few spring counts, 2 years now. we had one in 2019 and also one in 2020, and luckily, well, most of the volunteers were already in Georgia before the pandemic hit, so they just carried out the entire spring count and just stayed there, but no new volunteers could arrive, of course. But they completed this spring count nevertheless, and it was quite surprising in terms of numbers. About 500,000 on the first year, and in 2020, 700,000 birds of prey were recorded in the spring. And surprisingly, this completely different species composition, in which the black kite is really the most abundant species in spring to be recorded. And we see very, well, lower numbers of honey buzzards and steppe buzzards, for example. There's a very nice magazine published about the spring count, both of the years. We will try to make a scientific publication as well on that. But we've also published very recently in IBIS on these monitoring trends. I will not go too much into detail. It's open access for anybody that is here and is interested in getting more into these trend analysis on the different species that we record. And as a sneak peek, I've just included one graph, which is, I think, quite interesting. On the left side, you can see the different species. So 4 species are on this graph, 3 harrier species, and the black kite is the lowest one. And if we go into detail on the black kites, you can see the blue colored line is the juvenile proportion of the flight. So the younger birds, the juveniles, and kind of represents the reproduction success. And the red lines are the adult or immature birds. So as you can see on the left hand on your graph, you can see that this black kite migration is mainly in September, from starting of September until the end of September, with a clear peak mid-September from the adults. And on the right-hand side, you can see, and that's what we've experienced also in spring, that actually the numbers and the population of black kites seems to be increasing. And more specifically, the adults and the adult survival is quite interesting to see. There's not that many, there's not a very big increase in the juveniles, but apparently it's mainly these adults that have kind of a different strategy. And there's a couple of hypotheses that we've included to explain what's happening with the black kites. On the other hand, for example, for Montagu's harriers, we kind of see a negative trend especially in the adult birds and Montagu's harriers, especially in this breeding area that we survey, where these Montagu's harriers actually come from. We don't actually precisely know, of course, but it seemed to be decreasing quite dramatically. And that takes me to the kind of the downside of this project and the area. From the first visits, we noticed that there's quite a strong hunting pressure and poaching going on in the region, and especially in these coastal foothills, there's a lot of shooting. And in the first year when we were there, we were not really aware of what they're actually shooting at. But during our conducting our counts, of course, we got to know more and more about these practices. And it turns out that a lot of the local well, men, most of them are men, are actually shooting the raptors out of the sky. So they also noticed, probably much longer than we do, that a lot of birds of prey are passing by, and they make a sport of it to shoot them. And that was part of the concept and the motivation to continue this project, of course, not only to monitor and to survey the population and the birds of prey, but also trying to work out what is actually going on with this poaching. How big is it? What's the impact? And why are they doing this? And in the first years, we documented from the start of the project actually by counting every gunshot that was fired. So from the start, we have records of amount of shots fired, but also we record every bird that is visually wounded and seen migrating. We also put it in under a specific code in the database in order to document really well how many of these birds that we see that get damaged, probably by gunshots. And what I did and others did as well in the years after for my master thesis is investigating the scale of this hunting and poaching, and also the drivers why they hunt. And obviously it's against it's completely illegal. There's an official framework and legislation that makes shooting of birds of prey illegal and forbidden, but hasn't been any enforcement at all in these foothills. And most of the people, the general public, doesn't know that this is happening and to what scale. So the interesting part of my thesis research, and I won't trouble you with too many details, but I think it was quite interesting to map this problem in the first place, but also get an estimate of the scale. And it turns out that about 10,000 birds of prey average, very roughly, is shot down every autumn. And most interesting is also that there's no spring hunting, there's only hunting in autumn. And these hunters are keeping to the official opening season of the hunting season, actually. This is quite surprising. But on the other hand, this 10,000 birds of prey that get shot in the region is about 1% of the total flights that we record. So you could say 1% of the total amount of birds is killed. And of course, it's quite difficult to say anything about the importance or the significance, of course, of this problem. And one could argue that probably a high proportion is honey buzzards, and that's true. And maybe for these honey buzzards, this isn't really a problem for the population. Although this hunting is not only in Batumi on the flyway, of course, there's many other places along the flyway where they can get shot. Just to name a few, in Lebanon, there's a big poaching problem as well, in Egypt, and in other places along their flyway, in the wintering grounds as well. And of course, in the breeding grounds, there's often also persecution. But it turned out also that a very high proportion of a much larger proportion of harriers and sparrowhawks is killed compared to the honey buzzards. So on estimates, very roughly again, 5% of the harrier flight and sparrowhawk flight might be killed in this area. And this is just the proportion of the birds that we see, that we record during migration. So this might be really a black spot, or a problematic spot for harriers on their migration route. So part of this thesis was also to map this problem. This is kind of a heat map of the area where a model predicted the really hot areas for raptor shooting. And quite interestingly, the two dots on the map, the red dots, are the count stations. So we do have an impact directly around our stations, but on the other hand, there's also a lot of ridges to the north and to the south, where there's also probably quite intensive shooting going on. Well, not probably, there is shooting going on as we visited these places as well. And a lot of remains and a lot of hunters can be found during the migration. So following up on the thesis work I've done, there's been several others that worked on this issue, as there was Anna Sandor from Hungary. She focused more on the socio-economic impact and the aspects, and did a lot of surveys on with interviewing hunters and ask about their motivation. So on one hand, it's quite interesting to see that there's very little awareness about the different species that they see, but also shoot. So literally everything is shot out of the sky, and usually they identify it wrong. On the other hand, they know most of them are raptors, so it's illegal to shoot. And then also another, well, there were many interesting aspects, of course, that came out. But another interesting point was that the majority of them, they do this for hobby, for sports, for fun. And it's not really essential for the survival, as we have also witnessed that most of them do shoot them for the pots, so for meat. So they actually eat these raptors or parts of it. But that's very few of them actually give this as the main reason for their hunting. Also, the reason why they only hunt in autumn and not in spring is quite interesting to see, of course. So that was very briefly on the hunting issue. And we've decided not to go into direct conflict in tackling this problem. And we try in another way to convince the broader public and the general opinion, and also to convince the local community to get another point of view on this spectacular raptor migration. Of course, the most important aspect of our work is continuing this annual autumn and the spring count, but education has been a major action, working with students and schools, of course, to create awareness and to create knowledge about how special this place actually is. So we've been doing a lot of exchanges with students from Georgia and neighboring countries, internships. There's been school visits to the count stations, and on the other hand, also visits from volunteers that went to the schools to explain what they were doing up in the hill every day. And involving students have been very interesting for them to do research, but also to get involved in the organization and spark the interest in bird watching, actually. And what we also try to is do a different project with falconers, which is also quite a big tradition in the area, and involve them in bird ringing and to motivate them to get recaptures for the birds that they trap. We worked on an educational book and a teacher's workshop, which was about to be given last autumn. This is of course postponed, but will definitely create a lot of interest among the teachers and the schools in the wider region. But I think the most important part is to give an alternative to the local community. And in this way, we try to promote ecotourism and motivate people to go there, not only volunteers that are staying in the area, but also volunteers that continue and spend their holiday there, but also visitors and tour groups that attend and to come and enjoy this raptor migration. So we've created and trained several families in hosting guests with a network of homestays, guest houses in different villages quite close to the count stations that we have. And we've run a birdwatching festival, which David Lindo was one of the celebrities or honorable guests on. And then we've also trained guides and drivers for excursions and tours, so that there's an alternative income, of course, for many of them that or host or work on this birdwatching tourism. We've done this mainly and quite intensively together with the local tourism board. And of course, during the year, been very active on social media and several events like the Bird Fair in various places in Europe and the UK. So this is how this a visit of the local children looks like. They get very fascinated just looking through binoculars, and then if there's birds flying, if they are lucky enough to be at the right time, they get really motivated to come up again and to return and to do more bird watching. And this one is double, but the booklet we've made is also widely distributed in schools by now. So it's part, in some schools, it's even part of the standard curriculum. So every school in the area has a course on raptor migration, in which the basics of this phenomena are explained and mainly focused on why this area in Batumi is so special worldwide. There's a picture from the festival, which is been organized for the last 6 years now, and it's a good way of showing as a showcase how good the birding is, but also to bring interesting people to give lectures. There's a few from the Batumi Raptor Count crew about the numbers or about the conservation work we do, but also international celebrities and specialists on raptor identification or birdwatching that are invited to attend the festival. And I think one of the milestones of the recent years is the improvement of our facilities. This was the beginning years, and where we had to do it with this kind of shelter. But since last year, since actually 2019, this new watch point at Station 1, so the one that is most close to the sea, now has improved facilities and is a really comfortable and nice place to be at and to host quite a big amount of visitors and volunteers. With an upper floor, which gives a really nice panoramic view and a good angle on the raptor migration. During the festival, there's also an outdoor excursion to both the count stations, but also various other hotspots, birding hotspots in the area. And it's a good way of attracting the local media. And I think that's one of the biggest successes of this festival, is that's creating a vibe and creating awareness about this bird migration in the area. People seeing that a lot of international visitors come for this very unique spectacle, and a large crowd of people just attending, and they start to get to know this concept of birdwatching quite well now in the region, and a lot of people know what we're actually doing, which is a really good start to create more awareness. And of course, there's a really nice network of guest houses. The volunteers on the right-hand side, you can see, are treated with the local cuisine every day after a long day of counting. But also visitors are hosted in a very nice way in various guest houses. And yeah, just from the terrace or from the hammock, you could see the raptors just migrating. Briefly, what do we want to do in the future? The publishing of the spring count data is an important part that we want to do quite soon. But also for next autumn, we've applied for several GPS tags to work on just tracking data. And we want to apply them to harriers and sparrowhawks, which can be really both scientifically and on the level of awareness raising, really interesting. And of course, there are several aspects that we would like to continue. It has been difficult, of course, to plan and organize an international project in these conditions, but definitely the education projects, the conservation work, and the counts are essential. And on top, we not only want to reduce the poaching, but also try to monitor it further to see if the actions that we do and the different aspects of the project we do are actually having any effect or a good effect on the surrounding area in terms of reducing the poaching. One interesting short movie that came out and is now actually selected for the British Documentary Filmmaking Festival is this title. This is Worlds Collide, and it's a British film crew that came for several years that covered this interesting contradiction of conservationists and hunters in this area. And I would advise everybody here to check out the trailer. And if the festival is finished, you could see the full short film as well. The link is below and can probably be posted in the comments as well. So to sum up, it has been a lot of work and a lot of volunteers have been involved. And there's been several people that have been very instrumental to this. And therefore, I would not thank them all individually, but in the entire PRC team, of course, is thanked. Everybody that has contributed to this project so far. Many thanks. And I think we can already look back to quite an interesting and successful years. And I hope that there's a lot of people interested again to continue and to carry on the further work that is happening in Batumi. And as the last slide, I think you might wonder, or I hope you wonder, how you can help in this project. One thing you could do is become a member. In that way, you can get a very nice T-shirt every year, but also have access to our membership magazine, which is yearly and gives an in-depth analysis of the things that we've done and the counts, of course, on a yearly basis, the highlights of the counts, but also on the conservation work. You could also give a donation, and that's fairly easy to do through our website. Or you could volunteer, of course, if you can commit for 2 weeks in autumn or in spring. And everybody's welcome, and we try to involve even from beginners to experienced birders are welcome and get a training. Of course, not only for the counts, but also for the education projects. And if you're not up for volunteering, you could also plan a visit during the festival, just anytime during the autumn or the spring is very interesting to be at. So thank you very much for now. And I think we will go for a Q&A. Try to stop sharing here.
Okay, well, firstly, Johannes, thank you very much for such an amazing talk. The fact that you co-founded this incredible project is amazing enough. So it's really great to see that this work has come to what it has now, and it's ongoing, and it's taught us a lot in terms of what we know about the raptor population, certainly in that part of the world. And I must say that you have to be there to believe it. I mean, I remember when I first showed up and I was watching honey butters fly from 11 o'clock in the morning till in the evening continuously. And it's like, and then to see the large kettles you talked about were incredible. And also, as an urban birder, I remember walking through the streets of downtown Batumi and looking up and seeing a pallid harrier fly fairly low through the city. It was like one of the most ultimate of urban birds. So thank you, but I must quickly ask you to tell us what your favorite bird is.
Well, I think it's quite obvious already, and it's just right here on my shoulder almost. So definitely the honey buzzard is my favorite bird of prey, but also my favorite bird, as it is that just in any aspect is fascinating. I think it's crazy to think that this bird is only 4 months in the breeding grounds with us. So I think, and then I remember reading Ian Newton's book, for example. He describes it that this kind of birds, these migrating birds, might just be tropical birds that just take advantage of our summer and spend a few months here for breeding and then return to the tropics. And I think that's really a nice way of seeing it, that these honey buzzards are also kind of the tropics coming to visit us, the way they look, the way, how obscure they move through the forest, the sounds they make. I don't know if you have heard a bubbling honey buzzard before, but it's really something out of the world.
That's incredible, and it's a really interesting way of thinking of honey buzzards. And if you could be anywhere on the world, or in the world even, notwithstanding the current pandemic, where would you be right now? Or was that a stupid question?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll move swiftly on then. Zoomers, just to let you know that on Thursday the 27th, we've got James Lowen talking about moths. On the 31st of May, we've got a guy called Les Stroud, and he'll be talking about surviving in nature. On the 7th of June, we've got Charlie Corbett. He's talking about 12 birds to save your life. That's Monday the 7th of June. And on the 28th of June, we have Joe Shute, who's a journalist, who's talking about the weather. What do we know about the weather? We will talk more shortly in the Q&A. For those watching this in the future, and it could be any time in the future, if you want to see the Q&A, you need to become a member of the Urban Birder World, the Urban Birder World membership. By then, in the future, you'll know about it. So I won't say much more now, but basically join there and you'll see the entire conversation, including Q&A. But until then, I'd like to thank Johannes. It's taken me a best part of a year to get him here. I've chased women for less time than I've chased him. So thank you very much for coming.
You're welcome.
And
it's a pleasure and an honor to be invited. And I'm very glad it worked out.
Yeah, some way. It's well worth the wait. And Zoomers, once again, thank you for sparing your time being here today. It's been really educational, and I hope you stick around for the Q&A. But in the meantime, keep looking up.